Our very special guest is New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. Welcome back to Reaching Out.
It is great to be back. Happy New Year.
Oh, I want to begin because I'm so excited that you're here. We have so much to talk about. For the past year, you have done several audits on the New York City Housing Authority. As you know, we represent 8,000 employees in the New York City Housing Authority, and we view that as one of the most important agencies in this city because that agency houses over 500,000 people and is vital to the survival of New York City. You have made many suggestions on how to improve the operations of the Housing Authority. Let's talk about some of your audits. First one, you did the audit on the Next Gen how do you see that program,
So,
Next Generation?
First of all, the men and women you represent in the union who work every day to make NYCHA better is critical to the future of public housing. And I do want to say to all the employees who really just give so much of themselves, thank you. Your union has represented them so well, not just the union members, but also the people who live in NYCHA, the hundreds of thousands of people who not only built NYCHA, but also the surrounding community. And one of the things I said when I was running for controller, that I would do a top-to-bottom review of the New York City Public Housing Authority because we've got to lay it out, the fact that people in NYCHA are not doing well. There aren't resources. There aren't ways to improve NYCHA. So we looked at this through our audits, and one of the things we found in our audits is there are 55,000 backlog repairs because there's not a management system in place to deal with those repairs. So people are living with mold and dangerous conditions, and this has been going on for so many years. We've got to break the cycle. And it does come to this whole notion of NYCHA's Next Gen plan. And we looked at that because we want to support the chair in any way we can make NYCHA better. But Next Gen is really old gen. It's just a bunch of recycled proposals that have never really resulted in fundamental change at NYCHA. So we looked at what has to happen if NYCHA is really going to become part of the 21st century affordable housing plan in New York City. And it really comes down to one basic view, Greg, and that is transparency, transparency, transparency. Right now, we know every day when a robbery or a crime happens at NYCHA because it's all there for the world to see. You can go to the internet and you can find that out. But there's no way to find out what the state of repair of the buildings are, what the management plan is, how we're doing working on some of these issues. And I said, why don't we put it all out there? Why don't we put it on Checkbook, which is the controller's website that puts through all the financial documents? And that's what I'm fighting for, real fundamental change at NYCHA. The management of NYCHA using tools that can allow us to better track how NYCHA's management is doing, resolving some of these issues.
Do you remember the gentleman, Peter Drucker, who wrote several books on management?
Back in the day.
Yeah. His theories and his themes hold true to today. He believed that if you wanted to do something, ask the people who do that work, and you can solve those problems. No one has asked the people working in NYCHA, how do you fix certain things? I could tell you if they gave me one development to run, I could fix that development. I could eliminate all of those problems. And they're sitting there listening to me say that and say he's full of it. No, I propose this at the table. Give me one development to run, and I will show you how to fix those problems, because I would just call the members in, and each section that does that work will come up with their ideas on how to get the work done in real time. I challenge the city and I challenge NYCHA to take me up on that offer.
Well, look, your members are there every single day working to make NYCHA better. I think there's a failure of management at NYCHA that does not allow for transparent, open discussion about how to make NYCHA better. And there isn't a discussion about accountability. I think they're just trying to get by day to day rather than recognizing that if we brought everyone to the table, we can fix the vendor issues, the fact that people are walking away with the kitchen sink
Yes.
literally signing in. Now, we do have a partnership with the chair on that issue, and I hope we can make change. We've got to deal with the backlog repairs, and the way to do that is by setting up a management system that speaks to accountability. And you're right. How do you deal with setting up that system? Talk to the people who are actually doing the work, making sure that there's a management plan in place. I have been advocating for this both with this administration, the previous administration. And why do we do this? NYCHA, as it relates to affordability, is critical to the city. The people who live in NYCHA, they are the people who are aspirational. You start in a NYCHA apartment, and then you move to the middle class. That's why LaGuardia built public housing in the future. When I was back in the past, when I was growing up in Washington Heights, living next door to Dyckman houses, that housing stock was critical to the development of an entire community.
And also, I would not leave out the residents. I would engage them in the discussions because we would need their help when the elevators are clean and places are clean, that they know not to put garbage there, not to just to throw garbage out the window, and not to just to have somebody come in and urinate and all these other things in the elevators and say, oh, they never cleaned here. As soon as it's clean, somebody comes along and messes up. We have to have respect for where we live also. Well, and it's not all of the residents. It just takes a few.
Well, most of the residents, almost all the residents I find, are hardworking people who believe in public housing. The people who abuse NYCHA, whether they're drug dealers or people who have come to do harm in the community, they have to be rooted out and pushed out so that we can make sure that people are living in safe conditions. We need more security cameras. We need a security plan. And so many of the shooting incidents in and around NYCHA, we want to do everything we can working with the NYPD to make sure that people can live in safety.
Yeah, we would engage the police. We would engage the residents along with the employees, and we would come up with a comprehensive plan. We would be its own village, and all I need is one development. I challenge it. Give me the biggest development. I could turn that development around.
Well, I would be willing to work with you. I think there's a real way to start to look at what the NYCHA plan is per building. They don't tell you what the data is, and so it's very hard to walk into a complex or a building and say, this is what I would do to put in place, because they don't give the data. They don't have a whole listing of the violations on a particular building, and that hurts us in terms of reviewing how to make NYCHA built better.
Well, we're in discussions with the city, and we don't have the data either. We've been asking for it for over a year.
Well, I hope our 7 audits have been instructive and helpful to you.
They have been.
I promised this when I got elected, that we would leave no stone unturned. My priority is to build new affordable housing in the city, but we've got to preserve the housing stock we have today, and that's our NYCHA developments.
How about this one? You did an audit on the vacant apartments in NYCHA, and NYCHA first denied that audit. But then they had to say, no, most of it is correct.
We've got 200,000 people on the NYCHA waiting list, and we identified at least 1,300 vacant apartments. Some of these apartments have been vacant for 8 years. So give me a break. Every apartment should be utilized. We have a homeless crisis in the city. 58,000 people are languishing in shelters. Greg, 23,000 of our children go to sleep every night in a homeless shelter. This is at a time when the city economy has never been stronger for the 1% in this city. And yet there seems to be such a disconnect between the strong economy, right? Very little budget deficit in the 4-year financial plan. And yet when you look at the people who are suffering, it's the people who can't access permanent affordable housing like a NYCHA apartment. So when you hold 1,300 apartments off the market that can house thousands of people, I've got a problem with that.
Now, let me ask you this for just for a sake. Do you know how much the city pays to house a family? I heard it was $3,900 a month to house a family.
Well, using these apartments and these cluster sites is actually more than $3,900. It can be upwards of $5,000 to put a family in an apartment without a kitchen, which is vital for children, without an area where kids can study and learn. Our audit of our homeless shelters and these cluster sites that we just released shows thousands of violations. There's one apartment that we found where there was a profound lack of security, so a mom couldn't lock the door to protect her child. I mean, think about that. This unbelievable security gap where families are living in these disgusting, dilapidated places. Our homeless audit found that 53% of the sites we looked at had real evidence of rodents infestation, and 53% of these sites that we visited have serious violations related to, mold and just basic accommodation. So this is a crisis and a challenge we face, and this city has got to rise to the occasion. I do think that NYCHA is a roadmap because it signals that we can build and maintain affordable housing, but we've got to have a response, which means we've got to build housing for the people who need it the most, and that's the poorest who live among us.
Local 237 also represents the Department of Homeless Services police that do the security in the shelters, and they've been opening up so many shelters. Although they hired a lot of members, a lot of police, they're stretched so thin that they can't properly secure these facilities because there's so many of them.
Well, we saw one of the things our audit showed was that there isn't enough security at the shelters. We had, we may have a cluster of buildings that are housing homeless families, and yet they don't have enough security in the building. So this is something that really puts families, children at risk.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this segment of Reaching Out. Our very special guest was New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. Thank you once again for coming on Reaching Out.
Great to see you, man.